Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm an author. I'm 21 and I wrote these books.
And I'm gonna try to explain to you what it's about. The key word here being try, because for some reason I am incapable of summarizing my own book.
Powerless is like if the Hunger Games and Red Queen had a baby, but the baby popped out looking like neither of the parents. And they're like, what?
Powerless comes out. It is a book talk sensation. Everybody loves it. Come to find out, people are now saying this is like a direct plagiarism of this.
But I can't believe how similar like Powerless is to Red Queen.
If you are going to accuse an author of plagiarizing another author, please look at publication dates.
I'm just gonna say the thing I always say, the only thing I can say when I get a comment like this, and that is, this book was written and published in 2015. Stop saying this to me. It is so frustrating.
This is Victoria Aveyard. She is the best-selling author of the Red Queen series, as well as another series called Realm Breaker, and a new book she has hopefully coming out next year called Tempest. Red Queen is a widely popular young adult fantasy that was published in 2015. She's well-loved, highly regarded in the industry, has quite the social presence online, and recently posted a TikTok that drew my attention.
I'm just gonna say the thing I always say, the only thing I can say when I get a comment like this, and that is, this book was written and published in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. Stop saying this to me. It is so frustrating.
What can we gather from context clues off of this video? The comment mentions something called Powerless, doesn't say what it is, but saying that it's similar to the Red Queen, we can presume that it's potentially another book. And we watch as Aveyard pulls up Red Queen and then all of the subsequent books in the series and lists what year they were published, and then says, please stop saying this to me, this is so frustrating. Based off of these context clues, I assume that there's probably a book out there called Powerless that's relatively similar to Red Queen that this commenter was referring to, and the can of worms that led me to open. Full disclosure, I'm incredibly late to this conversation. This is a situation that ties back to 2023, but really it was late last year that there was a ton of conversation about it online. But as you, my lovely subscribers, are aware, I live under a rock, so I was not privy to this situation at all. I had no idea this was going down until a few weeks ago. But the spark notes of it are that there was a book published in 2023 called Powerless that many fans of both series agree is close to a plot point by plot point copy of the Red Queen. While this is pretty much agreed upon by the fan bases, there are varying opinions as to how serious a problem this is and how mad we should be at Lauren Roberts, the author of Powerless, as a result. And typically in these situations with a franchise as big as Red Queen, people aren't usually quick to jump to an author like Aveyard's defense because of how big her platform is. If you've got a small fish copying a big fish, people don't care very much. It's when a big fish copies a small fish that people care. And so it makes sense that for a long time, people didn't really feel like this was a big deal. But we have stumbled into a very bizarre place with this situation where Powerless, right now in this present moment, is arguably more popular than Red Queen. And we have now ended up in this situation where people who don't do a ton of research before they leave hate comments, apparently, are directing hate towards Red Queen and Aveyard for being a copy of Powerless, when in reality, it's allegedly the other way around. At the point in time that I was starting to dig into all of this, to me, it was still left up in the air as to whether or not these books were actually similar enough to merit these accusations, because sometimes there are copying claims online that aren't always the most merited, in my opinion. So I just got curious. I wanted to read the books for myself and see how I felt about it. However, I do want to say something up front. Regardless of what my conclusion is in this video, it is impossible for Red Queen to have been a copy of Powerless. Powerless was published 8 years after Red Queen. So if anybody copied anybody, it was Lauren Roberts copying Victoria Aveyard and not the other way around. It's simply impossible for that to be the case. I'm begging you all, a second of research before you leave a hate comment. If you're gonna say a book copied another one, please dig into which one was written first. But if you're a subscriber, then you've probably noticed that we're pushed way closer on the face cam than we normally are, and that's because I feel that visuals are going to help us a lot with this, and so I made us a PowerPoint presentation. I read both books, I wrote up my thoughts, and without further ado, I'm gonna present them to you. Let's answer the question. Is Powerless a copy of the Red Queen? Let's start with the Red Queen. Now, before we fully dive in, as I've dug into this situation, I've found a lot of people online saying a form of what's the big deal. There's a lot of people who are fans of Powerless who potentially read Powerless before they read the Red Queen, who can't really wrap their brain around why, even if this is true, and even if Lauren Roberts got some, if not a lot, of the inspiration for her plot from the Red Queen, why is that such a big deal? So I wanted to take a second to actually go through the Goodreads reviews and show you why it is a big deal if this allegation is true. The Red Queen has over 1 million ratings on Goodreads, which just shows how popular a book it is, and it has a 3.98 star rating overall, which for this many reviews is pretty good. However, there are a good number of 1-star reviews, and I keyword searched through them for the keyword Powerless. It was incredibly cliche too, pretty much the same formula as Powerless, but Powerless did it way better. If you like the idea of this book, check out Powerless. No, now I'm not being sarcastic. Powerless is awesome. It's similar to this book except mixed with Hunger Games and 100 times more interesting, trust me. Good God, this was painful. It was just so bad. The plot was not that important, and the romance, if you could call it that, was awful. The FMC, absolutely pathetic. I hated her. V was weak. I'm assuming she means FMC. She was weak, cowardly, and basically the worst pick-me. She was so stupid. Some direct quotes are, "I'm different and choose me." I hated all 3 love interests. Yes, there were 3 guys into her, and no one had any personality, basically. There were no good characters in this book at all. If you really like the idea of this book, read Powerless instead. It's so much better with such a good romance. If you want something similar with a little less romance, read Red Rising. Please do not read this book. I would never recommend this book. DNF 27%. Ugh, no, just no. I feel like I've read multiple versions of this book before, and obviously there's many similarities between Powerless and Red Queen. I understand Red Queen was written first, but I read Powerless first and don't really feel like reading the same premise again. This review, more than any of the others, is why I think this is such a big deal. I understand Red Queen was written first, but I read Powerless first and don't really feel like reading the same premise again. Also, Powerless is slightly more enjoyable, but also not really. I just think this idea of powerless versus powerful people is overdone, and the names in this book annoyed me. So here's a person openly saying, these books have essentially the same plot. I read Powerless first. I get that Red Queen was written first, but I don't really care to read the Red Queen because I know that it and Powerless basically have the same plot, and so I, as the reader, am not really going to find the Red Queen entertaining. Though the writing is nice, the storyline is very cliched. If you like predictable romance, predictable endings, and events, then this book is for you. It sits comfortably with books like Powerless and Reckless, so if you enjoyed those, you should definitely read this book. Reckless is the sequel to Powerless. So here's a person saying it's cliche and predictable, and saying it falls into the same camp as Powerless. Was Red Queen cliche and predictable when it came out, or is it considered cliche and predictable now because another author directly ripped it off? Maybe I'm showing my hand a little bit, but I guess we'll find out. And finally, reasoning for 1 star. I was bored with this book. It personally did not interest me at all. Go read Powerless, which basically has the same plot but is executed way better than this book. Once again, somebody saying that their reason for not wanting to continue reading Red Queen was because it bored them. Now, this person is not saying that it bored them because it has the same plot as Powerless, but I also don't think we can decouple those things, because it's saying I was bored with this book. It personally did not interest me. Go read Powerless instead because it basically has the same plot. I wonder how much of that feeling came from them knowing where the plot was going, because it allegedly is so similar to Powerless. So let's talk about Powerless. Powerless has 820,000 ratings with 116,000 reviews and has a 4.17 rating. I'll just remind you that Red Queen had over 1 million ratings with 700,000 reviews written out. Powerless has 820,000 ratings with 116,000 reviews actually written out. Also, out of curiosity, I keyword searched the 1-star ratings with the keyword the Red Queen, Temu version of Red Queen. This was the most awful unoriginal book I've ever read. I'll get into it more under the plot, but this was just a carbon copy of Red Queen and the Hunger Games, and you might be like, those are 2 amazing books. It can't be that bad, right? Wrong. She mixed the 2 together and watered it down completely. Her awful writing style made it so much worse. Trying to read this book felt like choking down sand. I'm 99% sure it was originally a fanfic of the Red Queen. Her writing skills barely combat those of a preschooler's, but at least they would come up with something original and creative. Even from the first chapter, it was dry and didn't hook me at all. Apparently, that was the only one I felt deigned to show you. However, I do want to point out something very interesting. When I keyword searched each word with the other book in their 1-star ratings, I found 23 one-star ratings of Red Queen that mention Powerless. I found 939 ratings of Powerless that mention Red Queen. Significant difference there. It does seem like people are, on Goodreads at the very least, calling out Powerless for copying Red Queen as opposed to the other way around. It would seem on the surface. But I also clocked something very interesting throughout my whole process of making this video. When I finished Red Queen, I went to log it on my Goodreads. And as one does, I went to give it my star rating, which if you're curious was a 3. But for me, a 3 is not a bad rating. I very much treat 3 as average. I know for a lot of people, a 3 is actually a bad rating. For me, a 3 is straight down the middle. I thought it was good. It entertained me, but I didn't really think about it when I was away from it. And I don't know that I'll think about it that much now that I finished it. And that's why I gave it a 3. When I went to give it that rating, I was not allowed to by Goodreads. They have blocked rating Red Queen. I wonder if Aveyard herself or her publisher, Simon & Schuster, went in and let Goodreads know that she was getting one-star reviews that tied to Powerless, especially given that Aveyard recently, as in the last 2 weeks of me making this video, posted a TikTok responding to a comment, seemingly very frustrated by the influx of comments that she's getting, accusing her of copying Powerless. It leads me to wonder if this difference can be chalked up to Aveyard or her publisher contacting Goodreads and asking them to block these reviews because they're alleging something that couldn't possibly be true because her book came out so much earlier than Powerless did. Again, if there are similarities here, there is no way that Red Queen copied Powerless because Red Queen came out 8 years before Powerless did. So while I found this interesting and it heartened me for Aveyard, making me feel like she maybe isn't getting as much backlash as it seems like she is if you look at TikTok or other places people are talking about this, I wonder if it just looks that way because Goodreads has stepped in to prevent this because they also agree that this is really unfair to Aveyard. I don't know. I just found it very, very interesting that there are so few one-star reviews mentioning Powerless and that I was not able to leave a star rating review at all because Goodreads is not allowing that at this point in time. So my next question became, well, what has Lauren Roberts said about all of this? Clearly, we know how Aveyard feels about it at this point because she made that TikTok, but has Lauren Roberts actually said anything? Was she inspired by the Red Queen? Has she admitted that? I scrolled back on her TikTok. The short answer is yes. She has been very open about Red Queen and Hunger Games being her inspirations for this novel, and has in fact often, when pushed to give a short summary of the premise of her book, described it as if Red Queen and Hunger Games had a baby that doesn't resemble either of its parents.
Powerless is like if the Hunger Games and Red Queen had a baby, but the baby popped out looking like neither of the parents. And they're like, what?
She also said something fascinating to me.
Because this book is just a mosaic of everything that I love to read.
A mosaic of everything that she loves to read. Remember that she said that. Remember that she described it as a mosaic. We had to shift angles because I did not charge my camera before filming, so I had to move it close enough to an outlet to plug it in. Anyway, let's continue. So in short, Lauren Roberts has directly said that this book is heavily inspired by Red Queen and Hunger Games, and in fact, from her perspective and in her opinion, is like if these two books had a child that did not resemble either of its parents, and that it is a mosaic of everything that she likes to read. Very interesting metaphor for her to be making. She also said this in an interview. When asked what were some of her biggest fantasy influences, she said, I always like to say that Powerless is a mix between Victoria Aveyard's Red Queen and The Hunger Games. Red Queen was one of the first books I remember reading, which is why I love fantasy. I was obsessed with that book. I love the world building and the idea of these different powers creating separation within the kingdom. I also absolutely adore Mary Pearson's Dance of Thieves. It has an enemies to lovers romance, which is one of my favorite dynamics of all time. It was very influential for me, especially when it came to writing book 2 of the Powerless trilogy, Reckless. Hold on to that, remember that. Oh, here's an example of a comment of her saying Powerless is like the Hunger Games and Red Queen had a child, but it doesn't resemble either of the parents. That's the best way I can describe it. So you might be thinking at this point, Meredith, if she has admitted that Red Queen is a big inspiration, a lot of times in these situations, people just want credit. If she is crediting Red Queen, then what's the problem? Let's continue. Even though her book was published in 2023, there are mentions going as far back as 2021 about writing her book, and back then she brought up Red Queen a lot more than she did once the book actually came out. And not only that, but when she recommends her favorite fantasies, she literally never recommends Red Queen or Hunger Games. So across her TikTok, she brings up Red Queen and Hunger Games as being an inspiration for her book, but when she is selling other books, she never tries to sell people on reading Red Queen. Just something I wanted to call out. Oh, by the way, I don't know if I gave a spoiler warning. Full spoilers. In order to compare these books plot point by plot point, I do have to show you their plots, and so I'm going to be talking pretty openly about the plots of both of these books. If that's not something you want to see, then this is unfortunately not going to be the video for you, but I'll see you in the next one. But that is quite enough preamble. I'm sure I've built the curiosity enough. What did I actually think of these books? How did I feel? Do I think that Powerless is a copy of the Red Queen? Allegedly, in my opinion, yes. Teeny tiny quick disclaimer. I know I've built so much of your curiosity, but just bear with me a second. I do think it's really important to call out that this is just my opinion, not just to protect myself legally, but because I genuinely believe that. I read both these books, and I have an opinion on how similar they are. I do genuinely believe that what Lauren Roberts did to build the plot of this book is lay out the plot points that she liked about Red Queen and Hunger Games and mesh them together. And that's why I said her mosaic comment was so interesting, because I think that it is a little bit of a clue into her headspace. I do at this point in time genuinely believe that what she did was lay out the plot points that she enjoyed about both of those books and shuffled them with each other, but did not actually come up with her own plot herself. In my opinion, I think she came up with this plot by mixing together plot points that she liked from Red Queen and Hunger Games. I think she made a mosaic of these two books that she really liked, and I don't think that's right. But now that I've given you my thesis, let me back it up. Let's take a look at the world building behind the Red Queen. What world does this book take place in? Within the universe of the Red Queen, it is heavily implied that it takes place in a post-apocalyptic America, where at some point, a subset of the human race started to evolve. And these individuals evolved to have silver blood and magical powers, whereas people who have red blood do not have magical powers. They evolved at some point to have these powers, and those powers fall into buckets with names. So not everybody has identical powers. Different people have different powers, but they fall into these buckets. An example I gave here was magnetron for metal powers, and there's a social structure among the silvers based on that power strength. So the most powerful individuals within the society also have the strongest powers, and the least powerful individuals, even amongst the silvers, is usually tied to how strong their magic is. And then you have the reds. They have red blood, they have no magical powers, and they are a servant / working / oppressed class. And if they don't have a job, they are forced into conscription for a war with a bordering nation that's been going on for decades. So you have the silvers, they're a ruling class, they're a bourgeoisie, and they have magical powers. And then you have the reds, who are an oppressed servant class. But even within the silvers, there are almost castes in a way based off of how powerful you are. So the entire social structure has to do with your magic. So now let's look at the Powerless world building. Many years ago, there was a plague that passed through this kingdom. That plague killed many, but some of those who survived ended up developing magical powers as a result, meaning that some people have powers and some people don't. There is no blood differentiation between the two of them. They're just called the elites and the ordinaries. The elite powers all have names and fall into buckets. For example, brawny for super strength. And the social structure amongst them is based on power strength, and there is a form of a caste system that somewhat ties to how strong your powers are. I also threw in there that the kingdom is called Ilia. It took me forever to figure out where I had heard that before. I was going crazy. I was like, I know I've heard that, but every time I Googled it, the makeup brand came up, and I was like, no, I know I've read a fantasy with a kingdom called Ilia. I have. It's called The Selection. I've made multiple videos on it. It didn't click for me while I was reading, but when I was doing my research after the fact on what other people had said, somebody else pointed that out, and I was like, I knew I'd heard Ilia before. She doesn't really take anything else from The Selection, but given my thesis on the rest of this video, I just thought it was important to call out that the country, the kingdom in this book has the same name, just spelled differently as the country / kingdom from The Selection. But then we have the ordinaries. They survived the plague, but they do not have powers. But the king gave an order to wipe them all out due to some disease that threatened the elites, and many still live there but are hiding in plain sight. So the ordinaries are not an oppressed or servants working class, but they've been targeted by the king for extinction. distinction. So if we put these two premises directly next to each other, we have the silvers and the reds, a ruling class versus an oppressed class that ties to having magical powers versus not. And even amongst those who have powers, there is a social structure, a hierarchy, a caste system that is based off of how powerful your magic is. And then in Powerless, we have the elites and the ordinary. We have the ruling / only class allowed to survive, I guess, as opposed to the targeted / wiped out class in the ordinaries. And within the elites, the social structure is based on power strength. But you might be thinking, Meredith, come on. I mean, yes, there's similarities here, but the idea of having a ruling class and an oppressed class really get invented by the Red Queen and roping powers into that, maybe people are being unfair. Maybe it really isn't a copy. Okay, all right, fine. Maybe it isn't a copy. Maybe they just have similar premises. Let's look at the government structures now. The government within the Red Queen is a monarchy where the king has the ruling power. The king had a first wife, a first queen, who died, but not before they had a son who has a very long title but is nicknamed Cal, who is the heir to the kingdom. After his first wife died, he married his second wife, who is currently the queen and is the queen for the duration of this narrative, and they had a son named Maven, who is the spare. By the way, I use fan art for Cal and Maven here. I will link the artists in the description. Definitely go check them out. So this is the structure of the government. It's a monarchy with a king who had a son with his first wife, and then she died, and then he married a second wife and had another son. So he has two sons, and they're half brothers, and the firstborn is the heir. Now let's jump to Powerless. So we have a king, and his first... Wait a minute. Okay, so we have a king. Him and his first wife had a son named Kit, who's the heir, and then she died, and then he has a second wife who is the queen during our narrative, and they have a son named Kai, who is the spare, but they call him the enforcer because his role within the government is to be the strong hand to lead the army on behalf of the king, the heir, Kit. And if we compare them directly, I'll be honest with you, I just ended up duplicating the slide and replacing the images. Okay, so that's hard to call a coincidence, but I will be honest with you that even with this, if it were just for the similarities in the premises and the similarities in the family structure within the royal family, people maybe could have let it go. But this is not the last slide in my PowerPoint, unfortunately. Let's talk about the main character, Mare. Yes, Mare, M-A-R-E, as in horse. I didn't name her. Don't come for me, okay? I didn't want to make her PFP an actual horse though, so I did ask my weeb friends which of their anime horse girls best represents her. And they went with Tamamo Cross. She's got silver hair and her nickname's the White Lightning. That's pretty sick. I can't believe there was such a perfect anime horse girl for this situation. So let's talk about Mare. She is a fief with half silver hair who is months from turning 18 and is being conscripted because she doesn't have a job. And the only way to avoid getting conscripted into the war is to have a job. She has a younger sister named Giza who is an embroider and is the hope of the family. She's such a good embroider that she hopefully one day will be able to open a business that will help her and her family rise in the ranks of the Reds and become a little bit more into a working class range as opposed to a very impoverished sort of situation that they're in now. But Giza's hand gets broken stealing something to help Mare, and so that kind of shatters that dream because it is her embroidery hand and they're not sure if it's going to heal right. And she lost her apprenticeship at the place she was working because she can't work right now. And so even if her hand does heal and even if she can continue to embroider after the fact, she would have to find another apprenticeship, and all of these things put their family situation at risk. One night, Mare tries to steal from a handsome stranger, but he catches her. And then she unloads her life story on him and finds herself an employee of the castle the next day. Turns out he was the crown prince, Cal. And then she discovers that she has electrical powers in a very public way, and she was believed to be a Red, so everybody's super confused. So the royal family forces her to pretend to be a long-lost Silver to cover this up. They tell her that they would kill her if it wouldn't cause questions, but people are asking so many questions that they need to have some kind of explanation, and so this is the explanation they come up with as to how she is a Red that has magical powers. By the way, none of them at this point understand how this is possible. It's widely believed that only the Silvers have powers, and the concept of a Red that has magical powers has allegedly never been seen before. That's what the reader believes at this point in time. So they tell everybody that she's actually a long-lost Silver, and then they betroth her to their younger son, Maven, in order to keep an eye on her and keep her close to the royal family and have justification for really monitoring her. And if she's caught, she'll die. Now, obviously, it's not if she's caught by the royals, it's more if she's caught by society, the other Silvers. But if it is ever revealed that she is actually a Red, then she will get killed by the royal family, and they'll just call her a trickster. That's what they've told her. And so she can't bleed in front of anybody, because if she does, then she'll reveal what she is. So she's living in the summer home and then the castle of the royal family, hiding in plain sight, pretending to be a silver, and that is the inciting incident of the rest of the narrative. So now let's look at the powerless main character, Peyton. She is a thief with silver hair. Oh, okay. So she's a thief with silver hair who's homeless and an ordinary, because she's, oh, I didn't put a punctuation there. I apologize. She is ordinary, so she doesn't have any magical powers, but obviously she would be killed if the society knew this, and so she pretends to be psychic, using her hyper observancy that was trained into her by her father, hence my photo of Sean Spencer in the corner. If you are not a fan of the TV show Psych, the main character, Sean Spencer, essentially has the exact same thing going on. He is pretending to be a psychic detective. He has a photographic memory and is trained to be hyper observant by his police officer father, who has dreams of Sean becoming the best detective of all time. Through a convoluted series of events that don't matter for our purposes, he doesn't become a normal police officer, he becomes a psychic detective. But he's not actually psychic, he's just hyper observant and has a photographic memory. And so he goes around, he investigates these cases, he sees the clues, and then at the end of every episode, he has this big pretend psychic vision of exactly what happened, and that's how everybody else thinks he solves these cases. Now here's where I'm going to break the fourth wall a little bit. I write these scripts up to present this information to you guys in what's going to be the most interesting storyline, but the way that I researched this video was by reading the books first. I saw that there was this comparison between Red Queen and Powerless. That was all I knew going into it, and I did not want to be biased. I drew the parallels to Psych and the Hunger Games myself. It wasn't until I was researching after the fact that I saw that she has claimed that both of those books were her inspirations, and that so many people have said that she kind of copied both of them or combined them into one book. But another thing that I noticed here, and something that I thought was pretty damning as far as evidence to this being more of a copy than an original work, is not necessarily the ways in which these works are similar, but the ways in which they are different. Because when I was reading it, I felt that every way that this book was different from the Red Queen could either be tied directly to Psych or to the Hunger Games. And it wasn't until I was doing my research that I realized that people are well aware of the fact that she also low-key copied the Hunger Games. I still wanted to make that point though, because that was a conclusion I came to myself with no other exterior opinions. And to me, at the time when I was reading it, that was the most damning evidence to this being a copy. Because yes, it is very similar, but all of the ways that it differs can be tied to these two other pieces of media. And before any of you come for me, if you break any book down to its bare bones plot points and then just widen your range to every other book ever written, you could find those plot points in other book. Oh, your character's brother died? Well, there's a bunch of other books out there where somebody's brother died, so you must have copied them. Obviously, that would be ridiculous if that were the point that I'm making, but that's not the point that I'm making. The point is not that every one of these plot points could, in theory, be tied to another piece of fiction out there somewhere. My point is that all of the plot points can be tied either to Red Queen, Powerless, or on a very small level, Psych. She didn't copy Psych nearly as much as she copied Red Queen or Hunger Games, in my opinion, but I think it's worth calling out that even this thing that seems original in her book does actually have a piece of media that you can tie it to. And yes, again, before any of you come for me, I know there's a lot of big Powerless fans out there who are probably going to take a lot of issue with this video. Psych is not in and of itself original. The idea of a hyper-observant detective who can notice a bunch of clues on the spot and make really spot-on deductions ties all the way back to Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, which were serialized short stories written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle from all the way back in the 1800s. So yes, Psych is an adaptation of Sherlock Holmes, but Psych is the first that I'm aware that somebody took the Sherlock Holmes premise and turned it into this person is pretending to be psychic using this skill. Really, it is only the fact that the character does this and that she was trained by her father to do this. Those are really the only two similarities between her and Sean Spencer, but I still think it's worth calling out, the same that I think it's worth calling out that the name of the kingdom is the same as the name of the kingdom from the selection. We are seeing a pattern of a seeming inability to come up with anything original. But that's not all there is to it. She's got a best friend, Adina, who is a seamstress and gets her hand broken at the end of the book just before dying. I warned you, full spoilers. Some of the stuff I'm going to be showing you is out of order, but this is part of my point, is my thesis is that she took the plot of the Red Queen, chopped it up, shuffled it up, and then took plot points from from the Hunger Games and just scattered it in there. So yes, Giza is an embroider and she gets her hand broken at the beginning of the book, whereas Adina is a seamstress and she gets her hand broken at the end of the book. But they are both clothing related artisans that are women that are very, very close to our female main character that get their hand broken as a direct result of the actions of our female main character. You see what I mean? I think that's worth calling out. One night, Peyton steals from a handsome stranger, gets away with it, but then sees that that stranger is in danger from a silencer. So the silencers within Powerless are a type of magical person, elite, if you will. Their power is suppressing other people's powers. She sees that that handsome stranger is in trouble with the silencer, saves him, and finds herself a competitor in the trials the next day because it turns out that that handsome stranger was the spare prince, Kai. She has to live in the castle, hide in plain sight, and pretend to be an elite, and if she's caught, she'll die. So once again, I made a comparison slide here with all of these bullet points. I specifically want to call out the steals from a handsome stranger thing because you guys know that I have a very, very deep belief in the idea of assuming best intentions. I usually assume that people mean well until proven otherwise. There's enough here for me to feel proven otherwise, and I'm going to come at this from an angle of assuming malice. Bear with me for a second. If we look at this from the perspective of if we were Lauren Roberts and we were trying to take the plot of The Red Queen and transform it enough to protect ourselves from accusations of copyright infringement, then you can really easily see how we got from the inciting incident for the romance in The Red Queen to the inciting incident for the romance in Powerless. Because one night, Mara tries to steal from a handsome stranger and he catches her. So she tries to steal from him, but he catches her and she does not succeed in stealing from him. But he doesn't arrest her either or have her arrested. And she kind of unloads her life story on them through their conversation. And then he pulls her into the castle to try and help her because he feels for her, right? Also, he's the crown prince. Worth noting, I didn't put it in the bullet point, but he also gives her money at the end of their exchange. So even though she did not succeed in stealing from him, he ends up voluntarily giving her money at the end of their exchange before pulling her into a job at the castle the next day. Whereas if we look at Powerless, you have Peyton stealing from a handsome stranger and getting away with it. So where in Red Queen, she stole and got caught, in Powerless, she steals and gets away with it. And in Red Queen, they just kind of bond and talk to each other. Whereas in Powerless, because she got away, why does the handsome stranger remember her or notice her or care? Because she notices him in danger and goes back to actually save him. He's not the crown prince though, he's the spare prince. So one of the things that she shifted a little bit is that the true romance in Red Queen is with the crown prince, whereas the true romance in Powerless is with the spare prince. Forgive me for calling him the spare prince, but I need an easy way to differentiate them because we have 4 boys to talk about and 2 of them are crown princes and 2 of them are not. And I just think that's the easiest way to differentiate all of them. And not only that, but at the end of that, Kai voluntarily gives her more money than she's already stolen from him and doesn't demand back the money that she's already stolen because at this point he is aware that she stole it even if he wasn't aware right in the moment. So those interactions also both end with this prince voluntarily giving her money. And then in Red Queen, she's pulled into the castle by Cal, but in Powerless, she's voted into the castle by the people because they select who goes into these trials, and everybody saw her save Kai. So you see where I'm saying it's like we're taking the same thing, but we're just shifting these little details ever so slightly to where you can still see a very obvious skeleton, but there's enough tiny changes made to give her the benefit of the doubt that it's transformative. And not only that, but it ends up with her having to live in the castle, hide in plain sight, lie to everybody around her, and if she gets caught, then she'll die. And again, in isolation, maybe this wouldn't be enough, but we're starting to stack it up. We have a very similar premise. We have essentially an identical royal family structure, and now the inciting incident for the romance follows the same skeleton with slight details changed. Now let's talk about the love triangle that exists in The Red Queen. This is just for this first book. It seems that moving forward, there's a slightly different love triangle. I know there's a lot of text on the slide, bear with me. Understand that I'm doing that because a lot of this probably ties to stuff in Powerless, unfortunately. Mara's betrothed to Maven, right? The spare prince. But it's obvious her love story is with Cal, who is the heir. She tries to steal from Cal when they first meet. We already talked about that. Maven is sweet and kind, but resentful towards Cal and their father, the king, for always favoring Cal. Okay, here's where we're going to get into kind of a weird zone. In The Red Queen, there was a ball. there is a dance. This is not unique to the Red Queen. The presence of a ball is not where the copying accusation lies. Obviously, Mare's date to this ball is going to be her fiancé, Maven, but she is an abysmal dancer, and it's Cal who sneaks her out of her room in the middle of the night to give her dance lessons so that she doesn't trip over Maven's feet at the ball. Remember that. Maven is her date to the ball, but it's very obvious to anybody reading the book that Cal wants to be her date, and maybe part of her wants Cal to be her date as well. She and Maven grow close while she grows to be somewhat resentful towards Cal because he's a killer. So she is well aware of the fact that Cal is this ruthless killer. Also, it's worth noting that in this book, Maven is very much a full spare prince. Cal is both the heir to the kingdom itself as well as the future general of the army sort of situation. He's more powerful than Maven, and he's going to be the heir and the leader of the army, and Maven is fully a spare. So Mare very much views Cal as this killer, and she grows to be somewhat resentful towards him throughout the narrative because of that, although she has an attraction to him that she can't explain because it's a fantasy romance, you know? Maven and Mare join the rebellion together, so there is a rebellion against the kingdom called the Scarlet Guard. So towards the end of the book, Maven convinces Mare to attempt to manipulate Cal because he says it'll work because Cal's in love with her. That manipulation does not work. Not even close. And any reader reading it is thinking to themselves, why did she think that would work? But that is a little bit of the point, I think. And in the end, Maven and his mother betray everyone, and the queen uses her mind control powers to force Cal to kill the king, and they brand him as a traitor and rise Maven to power. I didn't put it here, but they brand both him and Mare as a traitor, and they very much brand Mare as this red trickster who fooled Cal and got close to him and got him to fall in love with her so that she could manipulate him. And even though we, the reader, know that that manipulation doesn't work, Maven and his mother are able to paint it as though the manipulation did work and that Cal is a traitor now as well as Mare. And then Cal feels betrayed not just from Maven but Mare as well because he knows that she tried to manipulate him, but they do both escape with the Scarlet Guard, although Cal is a prisoner of theirs and Mare is part of the Scarlet Guard. So that is sort of the plot of the love triangle in this book between these two brothers. A core piece of it that I'll call out right now is that it is a love triangle, but anyone who's read any romance or fantasy romance would have clocked from page 1 that the romance is actually with Cal. And this is sort of a false lead of a love triangle. And there seems to be lead up to a more genuine love triangle happening between Cal and another male character for book 2. But I digress. Now let's talk about the Powerless love triangle. Between the two brothers, of course. Peyton grows close to Kit, the heir, but it's obvious that her love story is with Kai, the spare. Again, I'll go back to what I'm saying about following essentially the same skeleton, but shifting these little things to give herself the benefit of the doubt. We had Cal, the heir, and Maven, the spare, and she was betrothed to Maven, but her true love story is with Cal. Whereas in this book, there is Kit, the heir, and Kai, the spare, and she has kind of a surface level romance with Kit, but it's Kai that it's obvious is her love story. She successfully steals from Kai when they first meet. Where Maven was sweet and kind but somewhat resentful towards Cal, Kit is sweet and kind but resentful towards Kai. Because in this book, Kai is the enforcer, and so he is going to be the warlord, the war leader. Even though he's acting on behalf of Kit, Kit is very much protected by the king and not really allowed to enter any dangerous situations because he's too valuable. Whereas Kai is very much treated as expendable, and so he is the enforcer. He's the one who goes out and basically puts himself in danger on behalf of the royals, and Kit has a little bit of resentment towards Kai as much as he doesn't want to because there is love between them as brothers. And their father for always leaving him out of the action to protect him. And Kai despises their father because he tortured him to make him stronger and to turn him into this warlord kind of guy. There's a ball. There's multiple balls actually in this one. Again, the presence of a ball is not the part that matters. Kit is her date to the ball. Kit asks Peyton to be his date to the ball, and she says yes, but Kai sneaks her out of her room in the middle of the night to give her dance lessons because she's an abysmal dancer, and he doesn't want her embarrassing herself at the ball. And this is where they bond a lot. Does that sound familiar? She and Kai grow close while she grows to be somewhat resentful towards Kit because he's devoted to the king. Peyton joins the rebellion by herself, so neither of the brothers join the rebellion with her. A rebellion on behalf of the Ordinaries, the same that the Scarlet Guard was a rebellion on behalf of the Reds. The rebellion convinces Peyton to try and manipulate Kit because he cares for her. So it's not Maven convincing her to manipulate Cal, it's the rebellion convincing her to manipulate Kit. The manipulation does work. And in the end, the rebellion successfully shows the ordinaries that have been hiding in plain sight, but it changes nothing. And Payton herself kills the king with her own 2 hands. And Kit feels betrayed because he knows she tried to manipulate him. Did I do a comparison slide? Yeah, I did. I'm not going to go through all of these again, but I just recommend that you pause this and kind of look at the similarities. Again, if we come at this from an angle of what maybe was going through Lauren Roberts' mind, allegedly in my opinion, if she were laying out the skeleton of this plot and then shifting little things here and there, you can see how we ended up with these 2 things next to each other that essentially follow the same skeleton, just with little things shifted. Which prince it is the romance is with, and which prince has what role, and why the princes don't like each other, what the tension between the princes is, and who convinces her to manipulate who, and which prince she manipulates, and all of that, right? But the skeleton is there of an essentially identical love triangle plot, just with surface level details changed. The plot itself doesn't change at all, it's just the details. You see the picture that I'm painting, you see what I'm trying to show you? The base premise is the same with details changed. The royal family is exactly the same. There aren't any details changed there. The only thing that's changed is which of the princes her true romance is with. And then we have this love triangle plot where none of the actual plot points are all that different, just the details of it. So now we're going to go through little individual things that I want to call out that are also matching that further strengthen this point. One of the things that was matching in the setting, in the Red Queen, we have the Bowl of Bones, which is an arena used for executions, and it's where the final showdown happens. In Powerless, we have Bowl Arena, which I really struggle to say without giggling, because bowl, while less common than arena or stadium, is another naming convention to use for entertainment venues. The Hollywood Bowl is a very famous example. So naming it Bowl Arena is kind of like naming it Arena Stadium. I just thought that was really funny. Not that Bowl of Bones is the most original name for a stadium of all time, especially a stadium where executions happen. So they're both named Bowl, and they're both these arenas that are used for something very bloody and very full of death. For the Bowl of Bones, it's executions. For Bowl Arena, it's these trials. And the final showdown in the book happens in these arenas, and they have basically the same name. So then you have the silences or the silence from Red Queen. These are silvers whose power is to shut off other silvers' power so they can't use it anymore. And in Powerless, we have the silencers, who are elites whose power is to shut off other silvers' power so they can't use it anymore. I didn't actually put it together for this presentation, but if you need further evidence to this, I highly recommend just generally looking up the powers that exist among the silvers and the elites and seeing how many parallels there are. None of these powers are that original, but again, the circumstantial evidence just stacks up to where you have all of these powers that are kind of casually mentioned throughout the Red Queen book to fill out the world and give us an idea of what all the silvers' different powers were. And then so many of those powers have some kind of mirror with a different name in the Powerless universe. But the silences versus the silencers, I mean, she just added an R, and then it's basically the same thing. Come on, girl, why? So now let's go to settings / plot points that also really align, that didn't fall into a big bucket like the ones I've already showed you with the premise and the royal family and the love triangle plot. These are more just like scattered plot points that align very close. So in the Red Queen, we have the Scarlet Guard, which is the name of the rebellion. In Powerless, it's just called the Rebellion with a capital R. They're both resistances that the king thinks is small in power, but has been rising in strength. They both attack during a ball. In Powerless, they attack during the first ball. In both cases, they don't mean for it to turn into as big a showdown as it does. The Scarlet Guard was only trying to kill 4 very specific people, but seemingly a bomb goes off. And at first, Mare thinks that they've misled her about what they were trying to do, when in reality, they accidentally severed a gas line, and then Cal, using his fire powers, had basically blown the gas as though it was a bomb, and that had killed a few people. And they cover this up and lie to the people and say that it was a bomb from the Scarlet Guard. Whereas the rebellion attacks during the ball, but they mean for it to be a recon operation, so they don't mean for it to be an attack at all, but they get found out and have to fight their way out and end up managing to kill a few elites in the process and lose a few of their own. So in both situations, they attack during a ball. They don't really intend for it to be a big showdown, but it turns into one. And in both situations, the king lies about it to the people afterwards to make the rebellion / Scarlet Guard look worse than they actually are by claiming that all that damage was their intention all along. In Red Queen, the Scarlet Guard breaks Cal and Mare out of the Bowl of Bones at the end and saves them, whereas the rebellion attempts to make a stand at Bull Arena during the final trial. So they both have big showdowns involving the rebellion that both main characters were heavily involved in. Mare with the Scarlet Guard. Well, I guess technically they weren't that involved in that. Like, Mare was very involved with the Scarlet Guard throughout the second half of the book, but technically she wasn't really involved with because she had been captured and they broke in and saved her. Whereas Peyton is heavily involved in the stand that they make at Bull Arena during the final trial. But the parallel here is that they're both big showdowns that happened at the similarly named arenas that lead to a big battle that involves both of these main girls escaping in some way. Then we have Cal and Mare versus Kai and Peyton. I showed you guys the love triangle parallels. I want to focus in on the actual main love interest storylines here and the parallels. I've already gone over a lot of this, so we're going to brush over it really quickly. Dance lessons at night so she can get better at dancing for the ball. The real love's brother is her date to the ball, and she has a sort of surface level romance with him. Mare has a surface level romance with Maven, and Peyton has a surface level romance with Kit. But again, it's obvious that her real romance is with Cal or Kai, depending on which book. Cal has a bedroom full of armor. Kai has a bedroom full of armor. And this is a really small thing. And you guys might think I'm stretching here, but this was one of those moments in Powerless where I was like, I feel like it really is the small things that sell this as a copy to me. I feel like small things like this would be so hard for it to be a coincidence. There's parallel characters that I haven't talked about yet, Evangeline from Red Queen and Blair from Powerless. But Evangeline is a magnetron, which means that she has the ability to bend and move metal, and she can shoot it through the air, whereas Blair is a tele, which is the word they use for telekinesis powers in Powerless. She doesn't specifically use metal, but she can still move things with her mind, and a lot of her attacks on Peyton are very similar to the attacks Evangeline uses with Mare. I'm having trouble keeping all the names straight in my head. I really, really hope that I've done enough with the visuals to help you guys keep this straight. But Evangeline is the one who gets betrothed to Cal at the beginning of the book. That obviously is not true at the end when he's branded a traitor. Blair is not actually betrothed to Kai, but she obviously really wants him, and she wants the power that she would get from being with him. They have similar but not identical powers, and they're both your classic caricature of a high school mean girl kind of character. And at some point, they both pick a fight with the female main character, and the love interest of the novel gives them a pep talk. So for Red Queen, she's about to fight Evangeline, and Cal gives her a speech. And in Powerless, she's about to fight Blair, and Kai gives her a speech. Cal's speech is, "You're faster, keep her on the run, don't be afraid, don't let her see you bleed." Kai's speech is, "Stay on your toes and keep moving. You're scrappier than her, so use your head and use anything you can. She's weak physically where you are not, so take advantage of it." This is where I'm saying this would be such a stretch, and you guys might still think it's a stretch given everything else. To me, the really important thing is about Lauren Roberts and her mindset when she was writing this book. Could it be a coincidence? Could she just have loved Red Queen enough that it permeated her narrative? Or did she actually lay out the plot and say, I want to use this plot point, I want to use that plot point, I want to use this? And to me, this fight with Blair happens towards the end of the book, whereas this fight with Evangeline happens in the front middle. But there's so many parallels between Mare and Peyton, and there's so many parallels between Evangeline and Blair, and there's parallels between these speeches. In my opinion, I don't know this for sure, but I think that she read that scene from the Red Queen, liked it, and wanted a pretty much identical scene in her book, and figured out how to make that happen. And that to me is where she crossed the line from inspiration into infringement. This is where it becomes copying instead of just being inspired. It's not that she just liked the premise of the Red Queen and wanted to do something similar and then wrote her own story. If that was all there was to it, I probably wouldn't be talking about it at all. That's a tale as old as time. People do that all the time. That's not what this is. This is a plot point by plot point reconstruction. And I'm not the only person who thinks that. Then there is a moment where Cal, the heir, takes Mare to the village to see her family and say goodbye. He tells her he goes all the time because he wants to get to know his people and be a good king to them, and they ride on one motorcycle together there. In Powerless, Peyton takes Kit, who's the heir, to the village, mostly so that he'll show her a tunnel that they need to know where it is for the rebellion. But her excuse to convince him to go is that he should go because he should get to know his people and be a good king to them, and they ride one horse there together. Okay, so at the beginning of this video, I was talking a lot about the Hunger Games. She talked a lot about the Hunger Games. In my opinion, this is a lot closer a copy of Red Queen than it is a copy of Hunger Games, but I've already mentioned how some of the ways that it differs really call to the Hunger Games. The main difference between Powerless and Red Queen in plot is that in Powerless, there are these trials. There's this competition that our main character Peyton is competing with, as well as Kai. That doesn't exist at all in the Red Queen. That's completely different. But everything to do with these trials ties very closely to the Hunger Games. It's not identical, but one of the first things that stuck out to me is there's a character named Tila. She and Caesar Flickerman are basically the same character, and they have the same purpose in the story. They're the announcer of the games, brightly colored hair. The game maker scene from Hunger Games and the interview scene get meshed into one, where there is a scene where all of the contestants answer a bunch of interview questions with Tila and then go down into the center of Bowl Arena to show off their powers. So to me, that is a mesh of the game maker scene where they're showing off their powers to the game makers, or not powers, they don't have magical powers in Hunger Games, but they're showing off their skills to the game makers. It's a mesh of that with the interview scene. The rest of these are slightly more of a stretch, but again, it's more about showing a pattern. Like any of these in isolation, somebody would call me crazy for saying it's a copy, but it's the combination of all of it together. Peyton randomly, and I mean completely randomly, is not set up, is not prepared, is not justified in any way, is just incredible with the bow and arrow in the middle of the story. That's just dropped in about halfway through. The only explanation we're given for this is that she was trained by her dad, but why? Katniss's skill with a bow and arrow in the Hunger Games is because she needed to learn how to hunt with a bow and arrow to survive. And for years, she has been going out and hunting with a bow and arrow in order to feed her family. She is an incredible shot with a bow and arrow, basically never misses. A little bit of a Hawkeye sort of situation because of that background and that training. Peyton does not have any of that, and yet she is described as incredible with a bow and arrow as Katniss. It's very random. And also the thing that really makes it stick in your mind and makes you compare it to Katniss is that it basically pops up as soon as she enters the actual trial. That this trial, it takes place in the middle of a forest, and she finds a bow, and so she makes herself a bunch of makeshift arrows, and boom, all of a sudden we the reader find out that she's incredible with this bow and arrow. So it's not just that we find it out randomly in the middle of the story and that obviously there is a parallel to the Hunger Games there, but we find out that she's so good with the bow and arrow the second we actually see her in the first Hunger Games style trial. Weird. They also climb hundreds of feet in the air in pine trees to get vantage points, and she hallucinates at some point in the trial. If it were just those in isolation, me accusing it of copying the Hunger Games would be crazy, but those aren't in isolation, so I still think they're worth mentioning because there are other things that happen in the Hunger Games. And now I want to go back to this review in particular. If you really like the idea of this book, read Powerless instead. It's so much better with such a good romance. I already mentioned to you guys that there are a lot of fans of Powerless out there who admit as well that Powerless is a little bit of a copy of Red Queen and they have very similar plots. So you might be wondering why this isn't a bigger deal or why her fan base haven't turned on her. Well, there's just a lot of people who unfortunately don't think it's that big a deal, even though I do. I disagree with them. I think it's a big deal. But they also make the argument that if Powerless did it better, then what does it matter if the plot came from Red Queen initially? The first thing I want to say is that Powerless did not do it better than the Red Queen. Just objectively speaking, Powerless is an infinitely worse written book than Red Queen is. And I would never talk about something like this in a video. I just on principle would never put two authors next to each other and their work next to each other and say, I think this one is better than this one. I don't think we have to pit authors against each other in that way to make comparisons. However, If Lauren Roberts did not want her work directly compared to Victoria Aveyard's work, then she should not have directly ripped her off. If you are going to write an identical book to Red Queen, then you are opening yourself up to people reading them and making assumptions or decisions off of which of them is better. You are the one who signed yourself up for this. So let's talk about it. Which of these books is better? Wow. You guys, my PowerPoint making skills are unmatched, right? So on this lovely slide, I've so well detailed out my thoughts about basically my one complaint about the Red Queen, and that's the pacing of it. In my opinion, the pacing of Red Queen is way too fast. There's way too much plot that happens quickly. And as a result of that, it ends up feeling unrealistic. I don't think any of the actual plot points within Red Queen are unrealistic in and of themselves. I just think they happened way too quickly. And so there wasn't really a lot of buildup or justification for each of them, and that's part of what led to it being unrealistic. A moment that sticks out to me is when they decide to attempt a coup d'etat, and they're using the word coup, and the leader of the Scarlet Guard literally doesn't know what a coup is, and they have to explain to her, they being Maven and Mare, what a coup actually is. And then they're like, okay, yeah, let's attempt to do that tomorrow. And you're like, tomorrow? These people just figured out what a coup is and they're gonna attempt one tomorrow? It's a little quick. You know what I mean? It's just a little quick. But that really is my only complaint about it. No book is perfect. I told you guys that I gave it a 3 stars. I think for me, that pacing problem is a lot of what led to it being a 3 as opposed to a 4. But it also was Aveyard's first ever book. So I have no idea what her more recent work is like, and I'm open to reading more. I enjoyed my read of The Red Queen. Just because it didn't get a 4 stars from me doesn't mean I didn't enjoy myself. And I do think it would have been a 4 if it were split into 2, maybe even 3 books. I think there's 3 distinct arcs, but I do think the second and the third one probably could have fairly easily been combined into one more seamless arc. And I think then if those 2 things had been 2 books, where the first book is all the way up until we discover that Mare has these electrical powers, and so we have all this getting to know her and all of this build up, and she could have worked at the castle for some of that and been like bonding with Cal, and we could have seen her more with Killorn, who seems to be the other guy that the overarching love triangle is with. And then if the plot twist at the end of that book was like, oh my god, she's a red but she has powers, and then the second book started right after that and then went to the end of that original book, and then no plot is added. Like if we do that and we don't add any more plot, then we have so much more time to build out the plot points that happened, and I think it would have been better that way. But that is essentially my only complaint about The Red Queen. The other thing that I noted when I was reading it that I just want to note right now is that you tread into really dangerous waters when you do some kind of oppression style story where you have a tangible difference between the oppressed population and the oppressors, because you run the risk, and it's just a risk, of the message of the book being, yeah, they're worse than us, but does that make oppressing them okay? It's better than thinking people deserve oppression, but it's a little bit face first into the point and you missed it. And so I was a little bit concerned when I saw the premise of it that it was going to be that a little bit, but I had the thought near the beginning of the book when it's revealed that Mare has these magical powers, that there was this possibility of all of the Reds being capable of having powers, but due to their oppression, they can never really grow into that, which actually has a chance of being a very, very good message about oppression, and how the oppressors will often point at the areas where, according to the oppressors, those who are oppressed are not living in a civilized society, that a lot of times this is their excuse for continuing the oppression. But every single time in those scenarios, that society is the way it is because those people are being oppressed. How are they supposed to advance their own society when there's a boot on their neck? You know what I mean? So you have a chance to make a really, really good point with this premise about oppression if that ends up being the plot twist. In this book, I was a little bit disappointed because that is not true. It's not that all of the Reds could form these powers. There is something slightly genetically different about Mare, although there are other Reds who have powers and they are popping up more and more and they don't know why, but there is something different about them from the other Reds. It made me nervous. But then I remembered this weird, seeming like like it was a foreshadow line, but at the time I couldn't figure out what it was foreshadowing. And I'm going to give a quick weird spoiler warning. I have been asked by some of my friends to give spoiler warnings when I make predictions sometimes, because sometimes we'll be watching movies and I'll be like, oh, I think this is what's going to happen later, or I wonder if this is what's going to happen, and then I'll end up being right. And some of my friends now say that my predictions can sometimes almost be a spoiler because of my ability to read foreshadowing. So I don't actually know if this is where the Red Queen is going, but I have this prediction based off of what I've read so far. So if you don't want to see that, skip ahead a little bit, because there was this throwaway line that was like, and for some reason when the Silvers evolved, the Reds didn't. If there is an eventual plot twist where when the Silvers started evolving to develop these powers, they actively oppressed the Reds and stopped them from evolving so that they did not evolve along with the Silvers, and then pointed at the fact that they did not evolve and develop these powers to be the reason they are now oppressed, then once again we found ourselves back at a really good point being made with oppression. I don't know at this point in time if that's what Aveyard ends up doing with this, because I am actually interested in potentially reading more in the series, and so I don't want to spoil it for myself. I didn't put that on the slide because I don't know. I think she's just treading a very dangerous line, and it could turn into a really good metaphor, or it could be a pretty bad metaphor, and it really depends on what she does with it. But pacing is the only really concrete complaint that I have. Otherwise, I think the Red Queen is very well written. Some people say that they find Mare to be insufferable. I don't really understand how anybody out there finds Mare to be insufferable and doesn't find Peyton to be infinitely more so. Any personality traits of Mare's that are annoying are infinitely more annoying. I found Peyton to be quite insufferable. I had a very hard time rooting for her because of how annoyed I was with her. She's not, in my opinion, nearly as well built out as Mare. Which brings me to my complaints about Powerless, of which there are many. I'm sorry, I would not be being this harsh if it weren't for the copying here, but Powerless is not a well-written book at all, in my opinion. And I think the reason why a lot of people think it's so well-written is because if you read Powerless first and then you read The Red Queen, then you're gonna be bored with the plot twists reading The Red Queen because you know what's coming because of how similar they are. And I think that's what's leading to a lot of people feeling like Red Queen is worse written than Powerless, when in reality it's completely the opposite, in my opinion. First of all, the dual perspective is not chronological. So it's a dual perspective, whereas Red Queen is only from Mare's perspective. So you'll flip back and forth from chapters from Peyton's perspective or from Kai's perspective. But the chapters aren't chronological when they flip the perspectives. So you could read an entire chapter from Peyton's perspective and then flip the page and you're in Kai's perspective from earlier that morning. And to be fair to Roberts, I can't think of a time in my mind where we go back in time when we flip perspectives and we don't reach the events of what happened in the other perspective in the chapter. So the reader's never confused for long. But this did lead to durations of time in this book where I was slightly confused, just ever so slightly, because you'd flip a page and you're not going in chronological order. So even if you get used to it, which I did, and even if you then know that sometimes you're going to flip into the other perspective and you're going to go back in time, you're still left floundering to figure out where in time those events are happening in comparison to the other events you've already read until they line up. This is, in my opinion, a pretty severe mistake to have made. I think it really knocks down the book's quality to do that, because there's these stretches of time where your reader isn't going to know where in the chronology they are, and the events that they're reading don't get contextualized in their mind to the timeline until they get to the part where it lines up to what's happening in the other perspective. And I just think it's really confusing. I'm sure there are fans of Powerless who are going to call me an idiot for saying that. That's fine. You don't have to like reading well-written books, but I do. And I'm sorry, but this is not a sign of good writing. The use of the word torturing, this is such a minor gripe, but the way that Kai uses the word torturing in his mind, he'll start off a chapter with something to the effect of, after a long day of training and torturing, I was relaxing at a dinner table. I'm sorry, I've just never heard the word torturing used in that manner. It doesn't say torturing people, it just says torturing. It's just bizarre, and it yanked me out of the reading experience every time. I thought it sounded so ridiculous. The psych inspiration is basically never used. So by that, I mean it's used very heavily in the beginning of the book, and we, the reader, are led to believe that this is an integral part of Peyton and the way that she interprets the world. And she gets herself out of a lot of scrapes in the beginning of the book using her abilities of observation. And potentially, unfortunately for Lauren Roberts, I'm a massive fan of the TV show Psych. You put on a random episode and I could probably recite it. I've watched the series so many times. It's my comfort show. And one of the things that Psych does really well, there's a lot of things that Psych does really well. Like I said, it's my favorite show. But one of the things that I'll call out specifically in this moment is that Sean Spencer is this hyper observant guy with this photographic memory. And as he's going about his storyline through all of the seasons, we don't just see him use that to solve crimes. We watch how this is an integral piece of Sean as a person and how he interacts with the world. And there are random interactions that he has with random side characters where he uses these skills. We never go very long in an episode where he notices something and has a fake psychic revelation about it. And he doesn't only use it to solve the crimes. We see him use it in other ways. Peyton, on the other hand, uses this ability a lot in the beginning of the story, but basically as soon as she's pulled into the trials, she never does it again. Like, straight up, actually. It ends up becoming really obvious that Roberts didn't really think about how Peyton's powers of observation would impact how she sees the world. This isn't a really deep and thought out character trait. It's a lever that Roberts can pull when she needs to get Peyton out of a scrape. And that's basically the only time that it comes up. She never casually notices things. She's never deducing clues from it somewhat randomly. We don't see her leverage this skill in really any situation except when it's a dire one. And that's what I mean about it just not being a deep and well thought out part of her character. In the way that everything about Mare, regardless of if you like her as a character or not, she is very well thought out and a lot of her behavior is justified. And the parts that make her her are integrated throughout the story. With Peyton, that's just not true. This is how she has continued to live in a society that would kill her if they found out that she's ordinary. And yet we don't see her use that really ever. And there gets to be a point in the book where you almost forget. You forget that about her at all, and then it'll randomly pop up and you'll be like, oh yeah, but why is she never using that? And then, oh my God, the part that like actually drove me the most crazy, I don't even remember what the situation was, but there was, I feel like, was it when she was fighting the king? There was some like hand-to-hand combat fight where she was like, I'm gonna have to use my powers of observation to figure out this opponent and fight them. Girl, that's the first you've ever thought of doing that in your life? You're telling me that this is an integral part of how she survives in this society, and she's never thought about observing her partner in hand-to-hand combat to notice their weaknesses and fight them? Bizarre. But I've rambled about this enough. Okay, next bullet point. Dystopian with lack of understanding for message. This is what happens when you copy-paste somebody else's dystopian message. I gave you an in-depth, thought-out perspective on the dystopian message of Red Queen because it existed. It was there for me to make commentary on because it was there. I cannot for the life of me tell you how Roberts feels about what's going on with the story other than wanting to kill entire population is bad. Thanks, I'm over the age of 5, so I understand that. What do you have to say about that, though? There's nothing else. It's literally just, this is bad, the government shouldn't be that way. Cool, intelligent point being made. To be fair, when we look out at the world, there certainly are people who need to hear that, but there's no depth to it. There's no metaphor with it, and when I was calling out the dangers of this metaphor with Red Queen, I called out the fact that if the end message ends up being, yeah, they're worse than us in this tangible way, but that doesn't mean mistreating them is right, that does seem to be where the point of Powerless is leading. I don't know definitively right now that Aveyard ends up making a good point about oppression, but I think she is primed to. I just haven't confirmed that for myself because I don't want spoilers. Where Powerless, because Roberts seemingly just copied pasted Aveyard's dystopian, she seemingly doesn't understand why the government was the way that it was or what the point Aveyard's trying to make here potentially is. And instead instead just went with powerful population, powerless population, powerful population, oppressing powerless population, and that's bad and that's wrong and we shouldn't do that, moving on. There's no in-depth thought given to how this comes to be, why it comes to be. It's literally just this exists and it's bad, and she seems to be making the face first into the point and you missed it mistake that I was worried that Aveyard was going to make when I started Red Queen. And not only that, but I have peeked ahead. I'm not going to be continuing with the Powerless series, so I did just go look up synopses of the later books. And yes, a synopsis doesn't capture everything, but all of the plot is entirely focused on all of the romance plot lines. Roberts has sold this as a lot stronger a romance than Red Queen is sold. Aveyard doesn't even really sell Red Queen as a fantasy romance. It's a young adult fantasy that has romance elements, if you ask her, whereas Powerless is actively marketed as a romance. But I guess that's the point that I'm making, is Aveyard is attempting to make a dystopian point with this book. I just don't know if she's successful at it yet or not, but Roberts is not trying to do that at all. And based off of what I've seen of where the synopses go, that continues to be true. This is just a backdrop for her to tell this romance story, and there's no care given to the actual dystopian that she's portraying, which I wouldn't care about that much because this is a pretty frequent mistake in dystopian. But the worst way for it to pop up is for you inadvertently to be making the reverse point of the one that you want to make, which is that there is a tangible difference between these populations that is leading to the oppression, and that we have to fight against oppressing people for being worse than us instead of trying to get people to understand that there's no such thing as an inherently worse population. And if you perceive one as such, maybe question that within yourself. And again, the potential really great point that Red Queen is potentially building to make about oppression being part of why these societies end up the way that they are, and it becomes this vicious cycle where the oppressors point at those things to continue justifying their oppression when those things would not be in place in the first place if it weren't for the oppression to begin with. Red Queen is making that point. Powerless doesn't even seem to be aware that that is a point that could be made. And that is a fundamental difference between these two that just points to how much better written and better thought out Red Queen is than Powerless. And finally, such a tiny gripe. I thought Peyton was a man. I thought this book was gay, and I was honestly cool with that. I was down with that. I was like, okay, gay Red Queen, here we are. Her introduction contained a sentence that led me astray, and I assumed she was a man. And later in that same chapter, I got very confused, and I had to go back and reread a few parts because before we know anything about Peyton, before we've gotten a description of her, there is this sentence. Despite my robbing the woman at least once a month for the past several years, she still only managed to conclude that I am a he. At least she's trying. So I now understand that the point of this is to be a joke in saying that the woman that she's referring to here doesn't know anything about her because they've concluded that she is a he. But we don't know that yet. This was in her introduction chapter. I don't know anything about her. I don't even know what she looks like at this point. I haven't been given any metric. I genuinely thought Peyton was a he. And then later in that same chapter, this Imperial, which I didn't even bring up, but there's even a parallel between the Imperials and the Sentinels. This video is long enough as it is, but one of the police officers essentially in Powerless kind of ogles at Peyton. That was my first indication that Peyton might not be a man, but gay men can ogle at other gay men, you know? So while there was this description that kind of sounded like a man ogling at a woman, that didn't necessarily confirm for me that she was a woman. And it wasn't until a few other moments where I was like, yeah, okay, she's definitely a woman. And she is. But before we had any of those descriptions or could understand anything about her, in her own internal monologue, there are the lines, I am a he. You look me in my eyes and tell me that's not confusing. And that's where I'm saying, I think there's a lot of Powerless fans out there who are going to watch this video and call me an idiot. I don't really care. I don't want to think that hard when I'm reading my books. I don't think I should have to think that hard to understand where in the chronological timeline these events are happening. I don't think I should have to think that hard to understand these characters' descriptions. These are not moments where it confused me so bad I couldn't figure out what was going on, but they confused me enough that it pulled me out of the reading experience and I had to actively think, if not reread portions, to make sure I understood things about this story. The only thing that Powerless has over Red Queen is it is paced better. I will give it that. But the pacing was really my only problem with the Red Queen. I think the other reason some people might like it better is is what I've already said about Red Queen not being really a romance. Powerless is a lot more focused on the romance, whereas Red Queen is a fantasy that has these romantic elements in them. Anybody who is a really big fan of romantasy is probably going to like the actual romance itself in Powerless better than the one in the Red Queen, just because it is more of a focus of the story. But that doesn't change the fact that Powerless is an infinitely worse written book than Red Queen. And again, I only say that because Roberts herself opened herself up to those criticisms, and because a lot of people justify her theft of Aveyard's ideas by saying, well, what does it matter if she copied her? She wrote it better, so I like this book better, so I'm going to be a fan of hers and not Aveyard's. I think more likely than not, people either feel that way because they're really into romantasy, and if you read Powerless first and then you read Red Queen, you might find yourself bored by Red Queen or feeling like the story's cliche, but you read a story like that because allegedly the author of that book copied another author. Which brings us to what a lot of people are probably wondering, which is, why is it such a big deal? Beyond it just being wrong, like, I think we can sometimes just call out things for being morally wrong, even if they aren't the biggest deal in the world. But I also think initially this wasn't that big a deal because Red Queen was such a large series and such a well-known IP. But remember that this video started out, and I found out about this at all in the first place, because Aveyard made a video responding to a comment from somebody accusing her of copying Roberts, and she went through the years that she published her books and talked about how it's not possible for her to have copied Roberts, and goes on to say, stop saying this to me, it's so frustrating, which implies that there's a lot of people out there saying this to her right now. So it is a big deal. It is a big deal because it's affecting the author of the original work. At first, it didn't matter because it was a small fish copying a big fish, but that small fish has grown into a much bigger fish. And it has now reached the point where even though Aveyard was a really big name before this started to happen, she has started to be impacted by people's belief impression that Powerless was the original and hers was a copy, even though it's the other way around. Powerless has had so much success in and of itself that it has retroactively started to affect Aveyard, even if right when the book was first published, Roberts was an indie author nobody had ever heard of. She has been picked up by a trad publisher since, but she originally indie published this, and Aveyard was a well-established name. But Powerless is starting to eclipse Red Queen in popularity, and Aveyard is starting to be harmed as a result. Not only that, but when authors do stuff like this, and they don't face pushback or consequences, they are going to do it again. And that's what she did. As I was going through some of Lauren Roberts' TikToks, I clocked something really interesting. She always talked about this book called Dance of Thieves. She brings it up all the time. It's clearly a big favorite for her. And at the beginning of my research, I had found this quote from her where she said that Red Queen and Hunger Games were her inspirations for the first book, and Dance of Thieves was her inspiration for the second. So out of curiosity, I looked up plot synopses for both books. Slight spoilers, it won't be a massive spoiler, but slight spoilers for both Reckless, which is the second book in the Powerless series, and Dance of Thieves. There is a major plot point in Dance of Thieves where the love interests are chained together for a large majority of the narrative. That is also true in Reckless. Kai and Peyton end up chained together for a large majority of the narrative. I have not read both those books, so I don't know if there's a bunch of nuanced similarities the way there was in this, but she wrote one book that was two other books' plots kind of meshed together, copied one plot very heavily and pulled a lot from the other, only to then write the sequel as a copy to a different book. And she even herself said this one's gonna feel very different. It's not gonna feel the same as Powerless. Well, yeah, no wonder, because you would have had to have ripped the second book in Red Queen for it to have felt similar, because the plot that you used was the plot from the Red Queen. If you're going to rip a plot from a different book, then of course it's going to feel different because you're copying a different author. Come up with your own ideas. Is that such a crazy thing to say? And that's what I'm saying, like, the idea of people being chained together as a part of a romance, I'm sure that didn't originate with Dance of Thieves. I can't think of any other examples off the top of my head, but I'm sure you guys will be able to. And so I don't know if there's nuanced similarities the way there's nuances to the similarities similarities between Red Queen and Powerless that make it obvious it was a direct copy, but I do know that I'm heavily suspicious given what I've seen here, and that I'm not the only person to call this out either. And this brings me to a very, very interesting quote from a podcast that Aveyard does called Plot Twist. In the very first episode, which came out a few months ago, they talked about plagiarism and copyright infringement in the book world. He made this comment.
It's ethics, but I think it's a deeper thing of you distrust the author. So, I have read, some clear copycats, and you just think to yourself, you lose trust in the author. And what you end up doing is going to the sequels or whatever they write next, and you come at it with a bit of doubt. Because you're like, can they actually pull off something original? And when they don't, because very often they cannot, when they're left to swim on their own, you start to, that's when you start to turn sour on it. And it makes you kind of angry.
I fear that seems to be coming to fruition for Lauren Roberts, because Fearless, which is the third book in the Powerless series, was not met well by fans of the series. It has a 4.1 star rating, so it might not seem like that big a deal. But if we click into the 1-star reviews, I am so fucking disappointed in Lauren Roberts. Like, genuinely, viscerally, soul deep disappointed. I just finished the Powerless trilogy, and the only logical conclusion I've come to is that Lauren Roberts is a thief. Not metaphorically, not playfully, I mean a straight up copy-paste, no-shame thief. She hasn't just borrowed tropes, she's lifted entire plots, world-building systems, character arcs, even dialogue, from not 1, not 2, not even 3, but 5 wildly popular fantasy dystopian series, and she's parading them around like they're original, like we haven't read the very stories she's plagiarized, just with different names. Oh, is the final book The Serpent in the Wings of Night? I've read The Serpent in the Wings of Night. Hang on. Hunger Games and Purging Trials, Selection, Red Queen, in Reckless, Dance of Thieves, that's what I was talking about, and in Fearless, oh my god, does it copy Serpent in the Wings of Night? She finds out she's secretly royalty. Final trial ends up with Peyton and Kai fighting each other. Oh, my computer's dying. I better finish this quickly. The vibes, the dynamic, the whole force to fight the one you love in a death trial. Wait a minute. How is the Selection thrown into this? I really think people are just saying the Selection because of the name of the kingdom. Well, I guess also that she's from poverty and she falls in love with the prince, but that's just the Cinderella story, right? Well, okay. I was originally going to tell you that I had seen a lot of people saying that Fearless was really bad because she had finally written her own plot, and a bunch of fans of the series are now starting to turn on her because they felt like it didn't end up that good. And there are people saying when she's left to come up with her own plot, because she's been caught copying twice now, and so she's not really doing a good job. But that person felt like Fearless was a copy of Serpent in the Wings of Night, or that there were parallels. I can't speak to that because, again, I haven't read Fearless. I do really like Serpent in the Wings of Night. If you haven't read it, that's my favorite romantasy. I do highly recommend it. I think it's really, really good. But anyway, if you are an author out there and you're struggling to come up with your own plot and you keep getting rejected from traditional publishers, or you feel like you're not writing good books, if that is the situation that you're in, the solution to that is to keep working on your writing and keep improving your plot. Because if you don't, and you just rip from somebody else, if your book gets popular enough, you will get caught. People will realize, and you will be under enough pressure to write your own plot, and then you'll be showing to the world that you can't really do that. And that's what I thought was happening to Lauren Roberts, but like I said, that person just said that they felt like it was a copy of Serpent in the Wings of Night. I guess either way, my point stands. She either is still copying people, in which she's not going to stop doing it until she gets enough pushback, or this most recent book was her attempt to write her own plot and it was really bad. And that's coming from fans of the series. Like, fans of the series really did not like the finale. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is that she also recently signed a TV show deal, she being Lauren Roberts. She sold a plot for a TV show that she didn't write. She sold another author's plot for a TV show. And I want to show you another really interesting clip from this plagiarism episode of Aveyard's podcast.
And watching this, and I know I'm not the only author who thinks this way, but we were all kind of watching this with like, who's going to be Icarus? Who's going to fly too close to the sun? Who's going to have something that was self-published and now is put into a completely different sphere? And the editorial process was very, very fast, or didn't happen at all. And now suddenly they're at risk for a lawsuit, or they're at risk for, having a big splashy book come out and having it fall very, very flat.
because the publisher shoved it through.
There is still time for you to be that Icarus. If you have a show made that has the exact same plot as the Red Queen, and then Aveyard is struggling to sell options of her own TV show because the producers are saying it's too similar to a show already made called Powerless, that is one of the things that could lead to her having a genuine copyright infringement case against you. If she receives that tier of financial hit because of you copying her, there is still time for this to become a big enough thing that she can sue you and would have a case. Okay, we're gonna finish out the video with slightly worse audio because I'm gonna stop recording. I have a mic on my camera, it just doesn't sound as good, but I don't want my computer to die while it's still recording because I don't know what that does to the file and I don't want this to get corrupted. Okay, we're on the worst audio now, I apologize. All I'm saying is there is still time for this to really blow back on Lauren Roberts in a way that I don't think she's gonna like the outcome of. And I just can't believe that there are so many people out there who are so okay with fully actively knowing that this author is seemingly incapable of coming up with plot points on her own and are fine with that because they like reading the books. I don't think this is something that we want in our world. And I know that there's probably people who are gonna comment saying maybe she used AI. I don't think so. I've talked extensively about AI and how it actually works in a few other videos. My Silver Elite one, I went super in depth, so if you're interested in that, definitely check that out. But the way that AI copies people is not the way that a human would copy people. When I look at this stuff, I see the way a human would copy another human, not the way an AI would copy a human. So I do think she did this copying just herself, which is better or worse, depending on how you want to look at it. But I just don't think it's something that we want to encourage in the book world. And my heart really goes out to Aveyard. She's an established author. She's got quite the fan base. She's able to pay her bills off of this. It's not that she's in a terrible situation. I still feel for her though. I still think this is a really shitty situation for her to be in. And my heart goes out to her. That's all I'm saying. That's gonna be it for me today, you guys. What do you think? Have you read these books? Have you read one or the other? What do you think of it? I'm sure this is really gonna piss off the Powerless fans out there, but this is my opinion. I do very much think it's copied, and I do think that is a big deal. Let me know what you guys think. I love you, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!